The journey always began before dawn. Our bags packed, sandwiches wrapped, our cherry red Datsun 120Y would be loaded up, headlights on, engine on, Dad dragging on the first of many cigarettes, shouting impatiently for his little family to get in the car so we could hit the road. This was sometime way back in the early 80s in Kenya. We were a young family in a young country setting off for a holiday by the seaside, which on the East African coast is the tropical Indian Ocean. And I can still remember so vividly how the air felt, how it changed, as we journeyed from the high-altitude capital city of Nairobi, with its cool, bone-dry air giving way to hot, dusty air as we crossed the savannah, and then slowly softening into warm, humid, salty sea air as we made that gradual descent to the coast. What I didn't know then, that I know now, is that on that journey, my senses were awakened to an ancient and invisible molecular dance, held by gravity, powered by the sun, on a spinning rock. Welcome to episode 17 of If I Rule the World, and believe it or not, that experience I just described to you, and you'll know it if you've done a long journey to the seaside, stepped out the car, stepped out a plane, or whatever. That experience is part of a discipline called Earth System Science, the study of the Earth as a single self-regulating system where the lifeblood, if you like, is the exchange of material between the atmosphere, the ocean, the land, and all living things. So today's guest is Professor Tim Lenton, with a bachelor's from Cambridge and a doctorate from the University of East Anglia. He's now Professor and Chair of Climate Change and Earth System Science at the University of Exeter. And he's one of the world's leading experts, having spent over 30 years studying the Earth as a system. And what absolutely blows my mind is that although our understanding of how the planet works as a single system has massively advanced, there is still what Tim calls the enduring Gaia puzzle, of how the Earth's stabilizing properties make life, as we know it, possible, and that those properties appear to be regulated or mediated by life itself. So the Gaia theory, Gaia, in Greek mythology, was the primordial deity of the earth and ancestral mother of all life, was the work of James Lovelock. He's described as an independent scientist, an environmentalist, a futurist. His ideas are not unchallenged, but his view of the Earth as Gaia, one single system, has been a game changer. So inevitably, Tim and I talk Gaia. We talk about how the Gaia can be tipped out of balance, so climate tipping points, melting ice caps, thawing permafrost, etc. But we also unpack Tim's latest work on good, positive tipping points and how we can leverage those to slow down human-induced climate change. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's start with some basics. We use the word system a lot. Mm-hmm. How do you explain what a system is from your perspective as an Earth system scientist?
Oh, maybe we should apply answering the question to the Earth itself, but yeah, a system is just a very general term for some collection of interacting things that forms some kind of collective or whole, and that often that whole will have some properties that come about because of the interactions between the parts, so that you can't reduce, the properties of the whole system just down to what you know about the bits. And that's why it's meaningful to talk about the system, or to think about the system, or to try to understand the system. And when we turn to the Earth, how do we apply that idea of a system to the Earth? Well, it gets interesting, because when we say the word Earth, we think of the ball of rock photographed from space, right? But I would argue you could say there's two systems, but the big molten ball of rock is not the one I'm really interested in. The Earth system, when we talk about the Earth system, for someone like me, it's the thin film at the surface of the Earth. It's bounded at the top by the top of the atmosphere. The inner boundary is a little blurry, somewhere in the Earth's crust, or if you go to a longer time scale, maybe where the crust is exchanging material with the mantle. But this is really just a few kilometres thick, but it's a place where all the life is going on on the planet, and it's a remarkable system sat on top of the planet, the ball of molten rock.
Is it fair to think of the Earth as a single living organism, sort of Gaia principle? Do you get asked this a lot, I wonder?
I definitely think that we should think of the Earth system as a living system, and I definitely like the name Gaia. But what I would say is Gaia, or the living Earth system, or whatever you want to call it, is not an organism. It's a unique kind of living system. So an organism like you and I, we are doing a couple of really fundamental things. We're exchanging a load of energy all the time with our surroundings, radiating heat or whatever. But we're also exchanging all the loads of materials, like we're eating stuff, but we're breathing stuff in and breathing other stuff out, oxygen and carbon dioxide. And we're doing that all the time. And that's the way we maintain our state of being alive. We're this little island of order in a universe heading towards disorder. When you go up to the scale of Gaia, let's call it that, the difference is, well, several, but firstly and foremostly, Gaia has got very meagre exchange of materials, either from above, a few kilograms of meteorite material comes in from space every day, it's very little, and not a lot of material really comes in from volcanoes, a little bit, and a little bit of stuff goes out at the bottom of the crust. But what's amazing about Gaia on a basic level is almost closed to materials. So that's quite different to an organism. So it's more this, as a thinking like a physicist, as this fundamental level that there's something distinct about Gaia. And that makes Gaia, as far as we know in the universe, so far unique. I mean, I expect there are other Gaias out there, but we haven't found them yet. And then it's all about, trying to understand this, unique living system, cherishing it as well.
So the Earth as a system, the Earth system regulates itself. It tries to maintain itself in, what would you call that, stasis, a state of balance?
Yeah, my scientific hero, Jim Lovelock, and his wonderful collaborator, Lynn Margulis, used a word from physiology, homeostasis, but it's really the ability of a system, in this case the Earth, to maintain a particular stable state of, and they argued that the Earth did that, or Gaia did that, for the composition of the atmosphere, that the composition of the atmosphere was self-regulating, and also suggested that to some degree the climate is self-regulated. And if we talk about ourselves as physiologically as organisms, what do we homeostat? Well, we regulate our temperature really, really effectively and unconsciously, of course, with about 5 different so-called feedback mechanisms that are really good at holding our temperature pretty close to 37 point whatever degrees C it is. But that's something that Earth, or Gaia, has this ability, some remarkable abilities to stabilize some important properties at the planetary scale. Maybe not quite as hard and fast or as tightly as we homeostat, but still these properties, like maintaining the oxygen content of the atmosphere within fairly narrow bounds, they still demand an explanation, especially because if the Earth isn't an organism and it's not currently part of the population of competing Earths that would evolve by the kind of natural selection we're familiar with, then how are we going to explain how the Earth got these amazing stabilizing properties? That's the great scientific puzzle.
That kind of moves us into the conversation in terms of tipping points. That has received more attention. Just talk us through tipping points. Where are they? And, where are we with the tipping points, actually?
Yeah, so I think here we are going to start talking about the bad tipping points in the climate and the Earth system. And we'll come to the fact that not all tipping points are bad. And in fact, there were some big tipping points in Earth history that if they hadn't happened, we wouldn't be here to talk about it. But right now, our worry is that we can get to a point where a little bit more global warming, if you like, could tip a fundamental change in the state of some important bits of the climate. And that could mean tipping the loss of a major ice sheet, or it could mean tipping a fundamental change in the circulation of the ocean or the atmosphere, which essentially sets the patterns of weather and the climate, so we really know about it. And at about 1.25 degrees centigrade of global warming, we're already at risk of tipping at 4 or 5 big systems, and that would include tipping the irreversible meltdown of the Greenland ice sheet, which ultimately can give 7 meters of sea level rise worldwide, as well as tipping the loss of the West Antarctic ice sheet, which can go faster than Greenland and is another 3.5 meters of sea level rise. So something to be concerned about there. And then we are seeing evidence already that we're, at least on smaller local scales, tipping the abrupt thaw of the frozen soils called the permafrost in the high Arctic, which then adds more carbon as methane and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and adds to the warming. So that's yet another problem. And if we were to be sort of foolish enough to continue on the trajectory that current legally binding policies would take us, which is to a world nearly 3 degrees C warmer, certainly 2.5 degrees C warmer later this century when my kids are in their old age, then I'm afraid we could have tipped a whole raft of systems. I forget, my count was more than 10, but I don't think, well, what can I say? I don't think we can go there, because the consequences that would start to have through societies would be severely disruptive, to put it politely. But I think that they're not the only reason I would think that. Like all climate scientists, we would also say there's some very localized tipping points, like the fact that parts of the world are getting too hot and humid for human habitation when the extreme events hit and people are dying from heat and humidity levels that are attributable to global warming, and the numbers of those people having those tragic individual tipping points are at risk of escalating considerably, non-linearly, as well as the temperature goes up. And people don't just sit and take it when they're suffering life-threatening climate extremes. Their best adaptation, if they can afford it, is to get out of danger, get out of trouble. So those kind of deeply moving and sort of alarming localized tipping points will also be ultimately causing some social changes, and unfortunately they might turn into social challenges because we're not too good at welcoming other people in, moving around the planet at the moment, tragically.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for a lot of people it feels like that is starting already. You know, there are so many, like the poly crisis as it's called.
Yeah.
Are there any positive tipping points?
Yeah.
This is like this terrible thing that we do in science communication and the media. It's like, tell us there's hope, tell us there's something good. But I mean, is this genuine? Are there positive tipping points?
There are.